Her husband's pension was denied in February. The hospital took the savings in March. By April, Nora Fitch was working the breakfast shift at the Sundown Grill and the dinner shift at the motel 3 blocks east and sleeping 4 hours between them. And no one who came through either door knew any of it, because she did not carry it on her face. She carried it somewhere else. Flagstaff, Arizona, 1963. Red Rock Country. Ponderosa Pine on the ridge. A main street that still had the look of somewhere people intended to stay. A man in a plain canvas jacket and a dust-brimmed Stetson had been sitting in the second booth from the window since 7 that morning, nursing coffee, watching the room the way a man watches a room when he is not in any particular hurry to be somewhere else. Here is the story. Her name was Nora Fitch, and she had worked the breakfast counter at the Sundown Grill for 6 years. Before that, she had waitressed at the Roadrunner in Winslow for 3, and before that she had been the wife of Raymond Fitch, who drove a transit bus for Flagstaff Municipal from 1949 until the morning in October 1962, when something happened in his chest behind the wheel and the bus rolled softly to a stop against the curb on Beaver Street, and that was the end of 26 years of Raymond Fitch getting up before 5 in the morning, without complaint. He was 51 years old. Nora was 49. They had 2 sons, Carl, who was 23 and doing roofing work in Tucson, and Dennis, who was 19 and trying to finish his 2nd year at Northern Arizona on a partial scholarship and a night stocking job at the grocery on Route 89. Raymond had a life insurance policy through the transit union, $4,000 face value, that was supposed to make the first year manageable. The claim came back denied. The specific language was that Raymond had a pre-existing cardiac condition that had not been disclosed at the time of enrollment. Nora had not known about the condition. Raymond had not known about the condition. The doctor who reviewed the claim for the insurance company was in Phoenix and had never met Raymond Fitch. The letter was very polite. The hospital bill from the 3 days Raymond spent before he died was $1,840. Nora paid it in 4 envelopes over 6 months, the last one in May of 1963, and when she mailed that 4th envelope, she was left with $23 in her account and a house payment of $87 due on the 15th. She did not ask her sons for money. Carl sent $40 every month anyway, which she accepted, without discussion. Dennis sent $15 when he could, which was not always. She picked up the dinner shift at the Route 66 motel, not waiting tables, answering the desk, 6 p.m. to 11 p.m., 5 nights a week at $1.10 an hour, because the Sundown Grill paid 85 cents plus tips, and the tips on the breakfast shift, which ran mostly to working men and truck drivers, averaged $3.40 a day. She had done the arithmetic on a paper bag, and she had figured out what she needed, and she had gone and gotten it, without calling it hardship, without calling it anything. The Sundown opened at 6. She was there at 5:40 to do the setup. Coffee on, syrup bottles wiped down, the specials board changed to whatever Bobby Crane, who owned the place, had decided the night before. By 6:15 the counter was full. Highway workers, a couple of ranchers who came in every Tuesday and Thursday, a Forest Service man who always sat at the end and always ordered the same thing. She knew their orders before they sat down. She knew which ones took their coffee black and which ones didn't like to be talked to until the second cup. 9 years of mornings between Winslow and Flagstaff, and she still moved through a breakfast rush the way a person moves through their own house in the dark. No hesitation, nothing spilled, nothing forgotten. Bobby Crane knew about the double shifts. He had offered to move her to a split, breakfast and lunch instead of breakfast and dinner. But the lunch tips at the Sundown were worse than the breakfast tips, and the motel desk paid better than the Sundown lunch. So she had declined. He had offered her a 10-cent raise, which she had accepted. He was a decent man who ran a thin operation and had done what he could. What Bobby Crane had not told Nora was what the Sundown's landlord had told him in March. The building was owned by a commercial property group out of Phoenix, the same group that had bought 4 other buildings on the block in 1961 and 1962. The lease on the Sundown had 3 years left on it. The property group had no intention of renewing it. They were planning a motor lodge, 2 stories, 44 rooms, a swimming pool, a coffee shop inside the building, and the block was being cleared for it, 1 lease at a time. Bobby Crane had 3 years. He had not told his staff because he did not know what to tell them yet, and so he had said nothing, and Nora Fitch did not know that the job she was working 2 shifts to keep was scheduled to not exist in 36 months. There was a man at a table in the back corner of the Sundown who had watched her work the counter for 2 hours without once looking at anything else in the room. He had come in at 7 with 1 other man who had eaten and left. He stayed. He drank 3 cups of coffee and refused a refill on the 4th. He had a face that seemed to belong to more open country than this, and a way of sitting in a diner booth, very still, very upright, hands flat on the table. That was not quite like the way other men sat in diner booths. The thing that happened was small, and it happened at 9:47 in the morning. A man named Gerald Swick came through the door with a folder under his arm. He was the regional manager for the property group, and he had been through this particular door before, once in January and once in February, and both times he had sat with Bobby Crane in the back booth and spoken quietly and left with the folder still under his arm. He had a way about him that was efficient rather than unkind, the way a surgeon is efficient. Not because he doesn't care about what he is cutting, but because caring about it would slow him down. He did not come for Bobby Crane this time. He sat down at the counter. Nora brought him coffee without being asked, because that was what she did. He told her he was there about the building. He said he understood she had been here for 6 years and that the property group wanted to make the transition as smooth as possible for everyone involved. He used the word transition. He explained that the lease would not be renewed and that this was final, that Bobby Crane had been notified, and that the property group wanted to make sure the staff understood the timeline. He said there were resources. He had a card. He said it all pleasantly, the way a man says things when he has said them enough times that the pleasantness has become automatic. Nora Fitch did not say anything for a moment. She set the coffee pot down on the warmer. She looked at the card. The counter was full. 4 men on stools who had heard every word. The Forest Service man at the end, who always came on Tuesday, had stopped eating. The rancher at the window had his hands around his mug and was looking at the table. Nobody said anything. Gerald Swick was still talking. He said the timeline was 18 months, not 3 years, because the construction schedule had been moved up. He said the word opportunity once. He said that a woman with her experience would have no trouble finding placement elsewhere. She was 49 years old. She had $23 in her account. Her son was trying to finish school. She had 4 months of house payments before the arithmetic stopped working. She did not fold. She did not argue. She picked up the coffee pot again and moved down the counter to refill the cups. Because that was what she did, and she was not going to stop doing it. Because a man with a folder needed to feel that he had been heard. The Forest Service man at the end of the counter covered his cup with his hand and shook his head, not at Nora, at the room. If you have ever watched someone absorb news they didn't deserve with more dignity than the person delivering it had any right to expect, Drop a comment. Leave your state. I want to know how far this one travels. The man in the second booth set down his cup. He did not stand up fast. He stood up the way a man stands up when he has already made the decision, and the standing is just the body catching up to it, deliberate, unhurried, with a particular quality of mass to the movement. He was a large man, and he came across the diner floor without any of the urgency you would expect, which was the thing about it. The urgency would have been easier to dismiss. He stopped at the counter, not between Nora and Gerald Swick. He stood beside Nora, the way a man stands beside something he is not going to let be moved. He looked at Swick. "Who do you report to?" he said. Swick said the name of the property group's vice president of operations in Phoenix. The man looked at Nora. "You have a phone in the back." It was not a question. She said yes. He said, "I need to borrow it for 5 minutes. I've got a call to make, and it won't keep." He looked at Swick once more, the way you look at something you have already accounted for and don't need to account for again. Then he walked to the back of the Sundown Grill and made a phone call. Nobody in the front of the diner moved for the full 5 minutes he was on that phone. Gerald Swick sat at the counter with his folder and drank the coffee that Nora had poured him, and did not say anything further. The rancher at the window was looking at the door to the back. The Forest Service man had put his fork down. When the man came back out, he walked to the counter and stood across from Nora. "The lease gets renewed," he said. "Full term. Same rate. You'll have a letter by Friday." Swick said, "I'm not certain that you'll have a letter by Friday," the man said. Not to Nora, to Swick. The voice was very quiet, and it was the kind of quiet that takes up more room than a raised voice does. Swick looked down at his folder. He closed it. He put it under his arm. He left $1.25 on the counter for the coffee, and he walked out of the Sundown Grill, and he did not look back. The man put on his Stetson, which he had left on the seat of the booth. He put some bills on the counter, and he picked up his jacket. Nora said, "Mister, I don't know who you." He said, "I've been eating at diners like this my whole working life." He said it simply, the way you say something that is just a fact. People like you are the reason any of them are worth stopping at. I'm not doing you a favor. I'm paying a debt that's been running a long time. He nodded once. He walked out. She stood at the counter. She did not move for a moment. Then she picked up the bills he had left. There were 3 of them, and she looked at them, and she set them down again. One of the ranchers said the name. He had been watching through the window. He said it the way you say something you're not sure you're seeing right. Bobby Crane came out from the back and stood in the doorway, and looked at the door, and looked at Nora. He said, "Was that?" She couldn't answer him. Not right then. The letter came on Thursday. Bobby Crane's lawyer looked it over and called it ironclad. The lease was renewed for 3 years at the same rate, with an option to extend. The Motor Lodge project was delayed and eventually relocated 2 blocks north, on ground that had been a vacant lot since 1958. The Sundown Grill stayed on that corner. Bobby Crane ran it until 1971. He sold it to a couple from Prescott who kept the name and the specials board and most of the staff. Nora Fitch worked the breakfast counter until 1978, 15 years after that morning in 1963, and a total of 21 years between Winslow and Flagstaff. She retired at 64 with a small pension Bobby Crane had set up informally through the business. $180 a month, which he kept paying after the sale out of his own pocket. Without telling the new owners, it wasn't part of the formal arrangement. Dennis Fitch finished his 2nd year at Northern Arizona, and his 3rd and his 4th. He graduated in 1965 with a degree in civil engineering. He worked for the Arizona Department of Transportation for 31 years. He was the project engineer on 2 stretches of interstate highway in northern Arizona, roads that tens of thousands of people drive every year without knowing his name, which is the way most good work gets done. In 1987, Dennis Fitch got a call from a man named Terrence Cole, who had been 2 years behind Dennis at northern Arizona and had dropped out when his own father died, and the money stopped. Dennis did not know the man well, but he knew the situation well enough. He spent 2 afternoons making phone calls to the engineering firm he had come up through, to a contact at the county, to a man he knew at a contracting outfit in Phoenix. By the end of it, Terrence Cole had a drafting job that paid enough to finish his degree at night. He did, in 1991. He went on to spend 22 years with that same contracting outfit. He told the story of those phone calls at his retirement dinner in 2013, and he named Dennis Fitch. And Dennis sat in the back of the room and looked at his hands and did not say much. Nora Fitch died in 1994 at 80 years old in a house on Cedar Avenue in Flagstaff that she had paid off the last note on in 1977. Dennis drove up from Phoenix the morning he got the call. When he went through her things, he found, in the drawer of the nightstand beside her bed, a slip of paper folded in half with 3 columns of numbers on it. It was the arithmetic she had done on the morning of October 14th, 1962, 4 days after Raymond died, working out what she would need to earn and what she would need to cut, and whether the numbers would hold. They hadn't held, quite, but she had made them hold anyway. He kept the paper, he has it still, in a box on a shelf in his study in Scottsdale. On the wall above the shelf there is a photograph, the Sundown Grill on Route 66, taken from across the street sometime in the late 60s, the sign lit in the early evening, the plate glass windows bright from the inside. His mother is not visible in it. She would have been behind the counter, where she always was, but the light coming out through those windows is hers. John Wayne never told anyone what he said on that phone in the back of the Sundown Grill in Flagstaff in the spring of 1963. Not to his director, not in any interview, not in any letter anybody ever found. No one who worked for the property group in Phoenix would confirm what the call had contained or who had made it, and after a while, no one asked anymore. Whatever was said in those 5 minutes, the only record of it is the letter that arrived on a Thursday, and the lease that didn't change, and the diner that didn't close. There is a kind of man who sees what a room has decided not to see, and who acts on it not because he is looking for the moment, but because the moment found him, and he was already the kind of man who would not look away from it. He does not announce it. He does not stay for the acknowledgement. He makes his call and puts on his hat and goes back to whatever he was doing before the world asked something of him. The measure of a man is not what he does when there is an audience for it. It is what he does when the only people watching are the ones who needed someone to watch. If this story found you, pass it to someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't yet. There are more stories like this one, and every one of them deserves to be told. And unfortunately, they don't make men like John Wayne anymore.